Well, welcome viewers. This is part two of a series that has had to have been done because LPG is the warning of what is going to happen with solar and wind. It's a money grab for the manufacturers. It's never going to cater to the requirements of the electricity grid and what it takes to run cities and a nation. And LPG and the way that it was done and the way that it was undermined and allowed to disintegrate was the predictor for what's going to happen with this latest lie. It's all a lie. So, in this talk, the title, The Existential Collapse of LPG, When Systems Ask for Your Trust, Then Abandon You. Viewers, I want you to follow this in light of what they're trying to push on us with the wind and solar scandal. Now, for the Greens and people that are blind, you go right ahead and you allow them to continue to destroy the habitat and all the rest of it that they're doing. You got to take responsibility for it if you're an accessory to the fact. There's going to be no running and hiding. There's been a big solar farm being destroyed, I believe, by a weather event. The company has abandoned whatever was going on there. They've abandoned it. And now the people that own the land are having to fork out the cost of cleaning it up. You work that out. They never wanted it there in the first place. The company makes their money out of it and then it runs to the hills when it's time to cough up, when it's time to clean the mess up. Now, who got left with the mess? The people that own the land, and that's what's going to happen with the rest of it. And this is ultimately a story about LPG, gas exports and service stations. It's a story about what happens when ordinary people build their lives around systems, and this is what's happening now with the wind and solar, that speak with certainty. They demand trust, they encourage sacrifice, and later abandon the very people who believe them. And the LPG collapse exposed a deeper existential problem in modern society. The institutions often ask ordinary people to make their permanent life decisions based on temporary public servant political, economic and ideological frameworks. And when those frameworks collapse, ordinary people like you and I inherit financial loss, instability, we end up in distrust, and we suffer wasted years of life. Teaching point number one. We all need stable systems to build meaningful lives, and the public servant, politician, governments, they don't seem to know what that is. And a person builds life through long-term assumptions. We choose careers, buy a home. Well, you can't buy a home anymore. Raise families, purchase vehicles. You can hardly buy a vehicle anymore. And structure budgets based on what appears stable. And LPG was presented as a stable economic decision. Australians made practical choices because they believed the system surrounding LPG would remain functional long enough to justify their investment. This is what's happening now with wind and solar. When systems appear stable, people build confidently. When systems collapse, and they're going to collapse unexpectedly, people experience more than inconvenience, they experience existential destabilization. Families budgeted around LPG savings. Tradesmen purchased LPG vehicles. Fleet operators built transport models around LPG. People assumed fuel access would remain stable. And the public servant governments refused those assumptions through grant. They reinforced the assumptions. The public servant governments reinforced those assumptions through grants. Now, the existential reality. We all require predictable systems to create order. And when predictability disappears, societies collapse. They collapse financially, they collapse psychologically, and this is what the public servants, politicians, governments are doing to us. Trust becomes dangerous when the institutions lack long-term integrity, and basically that's saying our public servant governments lack long-term integrity. They haven't got it. It's not there. They're empty meat suits running the country. And Australians, we were told LPG was efficient, LPG was affordable and part of Australia's future, and government grants reinforce legitimacy of $870 million worth. People acted in good faith because trust was actively cultivated. Then policy changed. Then excise arrived. Then incentives disappeared. Then infrastructure collapsed. The greatest damage was not simply financial. The greatest damage was the betrayal of trust in the public servant institutional governments. Citizens acted on the government's encouragement. Taxpayer-funded expansion. Governments reversed direction. And consumers inherited the consequences again. And that's what's going to happen with solar and wind. Trust becomes traumatic when institutions make promises they're unwilling to defend over time, and that's happened time and time again. And you will not see Chris Bowen, I think his name is, anywhere in sight when his ideology collapses, because it already has started to. Teaching point number 3. Modern individuals often carry risks created by public servant government institutions. Now, governments, public servants, often operate on election cycles. Corporations operate on profit cycles. Put the two together, and activist groups operate on ideological cycles. The Greens, ordinary people live in real time at the consequence of the above. We carry mortgages, children, aging parents, limited savings, and finite working years. We absorb consequences created by decision makers who often move on untouched when everything collapses, when they mislead us. Public servant politicians leave office and their mess behind. Corporate executives change roles and take the money and run. Activists move to new causes and leave their mess all around them, like they are with this, what they're doing to the habitat with their wind and solar ideology, wicked ideology. And ordinary citizens like you and I remain with the financial consequences. And the existential reality is, viewers, the modern individual increasingly absorbs systematic volatility created by these public servant, politician, institutional governments. We end up, that's why everything's so expensive. No house under $1 million now. Electricity dearer than it's ever been. What's the other one? Immigrants coming in left, right and centre, 1,000 a day minimum. Teaching point number 4. It's out of control, viewers. They're giving the gas away by the billions of dollars. Time loss is one of the greatest hidden tragedies. Time loss. Money can sometimes be rebuilt, but time can't, viewers. When people invest years into systems that collapse, encouraged by the public servant institutional governments, and just remember, the governments have runs on an ABN. It's got its own ABN. They purchase vehicles, these people, we do, conversion costs, travel planning, fuel dependencies, life structuring. You can't find LPG anywhere now in the Bowser. And if you can, it's like finding gold. And so we lose irreplaceable years going through these motions. And you watch what happens with the wind and the solar. The years and the billions and hundreds of billions of dollars that are going to be lost. And this makes what makes systematic betrayal existential, because the public servant governments, institutions, are systematically betraying the goodwill of Australian people. And viewers, life is finite. Bad systems steal irreplaceable seasons of our lives. And the existential reality, viewers, is wasted years can wound people more deeply than lost money. And that's exactly the kind of abuse that the public servant institutional governments, where the inmates are running the asylum, are abusing us now. Point number 5. Public servant institutional instability in the government creates cultural cynicism, and the country's never been as cynical as it is right now. Repeated policy reversals train citizens to distrust these public servant government institutions. We've lost our allies. We've got no army. This is Australia. We don't know who's male and female. We don't know if Anzac Day's legit or not anymore. It's out of control, viewers. And people begin asking, why trust government incentives? Why trust future transitions? Why believe infrastructure promises? And this creates broader societal cynicism. And I'm telling you, the Australian society has never been more cynical than what it is now in 2026. The public servant, dysfunctional institutional governments have been exposed like never before. And that's why they're trying to shut down social media. And just for the record, Karen, Julia Ingram, she's leaving her job. She's just going to take the money and run and leave the mess to everybody else. And the existential reality of that is, viewers, when trust repeatedly collapses, society becomes fragmented. And that's what they want. They want the cynicism to fragment us. Teaching point number 6. The deeper the issue is misplaced dependence. The deeper issue is misplaced dependence. The LPG story exposes a deeper human issue. We often place too much confidence in public servant systems, governments, institutions, which they do not control. The public servant governments change, markets change, policies change, technology changes. But the individual must become wiser about who we depend on. Diversity dependence, avoid blind trust, viewers, question incentives, and protect optionality. Leave your options open. The existential reality is freedom requires reducing unnecessary dependence on unstable public servant institutional government systems. Be careful. Teaching point number 7. Suffering can and should produce clarity. Delusionment can become wisdom, viewers. The person who survives systemic betrayal from these public servant institutional governments may become, or you should become, more cautious, more strategic, less naive, and more independent, because pain can expose reality. The existential reality is, viewers, hard lessons often produce stronger individual and collective discernment. Teaching point number 8, final point. This pattern extends beyond the LPG deception. This is not only fuel policy, viewers. The same existential risks exist in housing, superannuation, taxation, energy transitions. That's the big one at the moment, energy transitions. Watch that fall over. Employment markets. AI's completely turned so many jobs upside down. AI disruption. AI is a blessing. And retirement systems. And the pattern repeats whenever institutions demand sacrifice without long-term accountability, and that's what you've got to be careful of. The existential reality is, viewers, the LPG collapse is the warning for all future energy transitions, and I can guarantee you that the wind and solar lie is going to end up no different to the LPG collapse. So let's reflect. What areas of your life are currently built on assumptions that may be far less stable than you believe? Let me challenge you. Before trusting major institutional transitions, ask harder questions. How long will this last? Who profits? Who carries the downside risk? What happens if it fails? Well, hopefully not what's happened with LPG. Proverb. A wise Australian builds carefully when the architects of society frequently redesign the foundation. You've got to be careful. Let's close. The deepest lesson of LPG and what happened with it and how they undermined it and lied to us is not about fuel. Viewers, it's about human vulnerability inside unstable public servant institutional government systems. Ordinary Australian people trusted institutions that encourage long-term sacrifice without guaranteeing long-term stability. And the true loss was not merely financial, viewers. It was trust, time, security, and peace of mind, which equals abuse, psychological abuse. And if people do not learn how fragile these modern public servant institutional government systems can be, they will continue building their lives on foundations that will undermine them in every aspect and respect, as we're witnessing day by day here in Australia. I'm Count Straight, Dr. JWAU, also known as Pro Theologist on YouTube, and Pro Bricky and Pro Theologist on Facebook. Sub, like, and I'll see you later.